Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to the second day of the functional programming track. For those who do not know me, my name is Gien Vershatse, and I live in Belgium. And for the past 9 years, I have been making fabulous and sometimes not so fabulous software. You know, in the beginning, I did this in C#. But for the past 2.5 years, I have been programming in F#. And besides that, I spend a lot of my free time creating environments in which people can learn from one another. So in Belgium, I'm part of 2 meetups, Socrates BE and DDD BE. I'm also a member of the F# Foundation Board, where I'm responsible for running the mentorship program. And last but not least, I also help to organize Open F#, which is an F# conference in San Francisco, because it totally makes sense to organize a conference in San Francisco when you're living in Belgium. So this talk started a while back, somewhere in the early October of 2017. And I was trying to find a new topic for my talk. And I had heard a lot about Suave, and I had seen some awesome talks that year about Freya, and you thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to learn both these libraries, I'm going to compare them to one another, and I'm going to pour it in a talk, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. So all I need now is kind of a pet project to make it really interesting. And that didn't take long to find either, because at the same time I had been starting to listen to this podcast from 2 British comedians called Sloss and Humphreys on the Road. And in that podcast they have a section where they talk about the things that people do that kind of baffle you or annoy you. And they're huge Harry Potter fans, so they called those people muggles. For an example, it really annoys me when people put on their fog lights when it rains. I don't know why, but I get like really angry on the road, like, why are you doing this? So that person is a muggle. And the end conclusion is that we're all a muggle sometimes, because we do things that annoy other people. And like the listeners are huge fans of that, and they're such huge fans, they actually created a Google Doc called Mugglepedia, in which they actually add all these things that they talk about on the podcast. And I thought, well, you know, I'm just going to take that Google Doc, I'm going to turn it into an actual mugglepedia.com, and I'm going to create a web application out of that. So, you know, off I went, you know, making my front end, you know, getting the data into my database, reading a bit, coding a bit, reading a bit, coding a bit. So, you know, doing a lot of stuff and absolutely getting nowhere that was usable for a talk. So whenever that happens, I like to sit myself down and have a serious conversation with myself. And to huge hilarity of my neighbors, I actually do this out loud. And I came to realize a few things. Like, first of all, I had been so focused on creating an awesome talk that I hadn't really thought about my pet project all that much. And secondly, I had this great idea, but I didn't really know how to execute it. Like, I don't know how to compare these 2 libraries that will actually be useful for myself and other people. And last, I had to learn a lot of stuff. And I didn't want to spend so much time on it, and I didn't know how to learn all these things very efficiently or when I was done learning. So I thought I'll like swap directions, and I'll try to find out the answer of these 3 questions first, and then I'll get back to it. And then I came to realize that, you know, if I didn't know these things, then maybe other people didn't know these things. And I could actually talk about this instead, like my journey on getting to a good comparison. So I came up with a new plan for my talk, and this is it, the plan. I'm going to talk a bit about the actual problem that we're trying to solve and how you can do a structured analysis of that problem. I investigated how you can compare things or get to a place where you can actually have criteria to compare things. I'm going to talk about that a bit as well. So then we're going to actually, dive into it and do a controlled experiment to actually gain the knowledge. And then we're, going to plug it all back in and actually compare the things with each other. And normally I have some time for questions, but like this setup isn't ideal. So if you have any questions left, I don't explain everything perfectly. Like, come and grab me after the talk, and we can discuss them. So the first thing I did was check general problem solving, and I came to realize that I had been doing it really backwards. I have this absolutely fantastic solution. I actually had two. I kind of need a problem for this. And I started to realize that this wasn't the only place in my life that I was doing this. I buy gadgets that I don't really need, and then I try to invent a purpose for them. I come home from conferences, and I've seen all these fantastic libraries, and then I'm sort of looking for a place in my projects where I could use them. And I know that I'm not the only one doing this. We all had this colleague that discovered this new design pattern, and all of a sudden, like appropriate or not, like it pops up everywhere in your project at the office. And for your pet projects and all, that's fine because that's what they're made for. But if you do that in a work environment, it could have really serious consequences for the project and for your team. So I wanted to try to find a way so that we don't easily do that anymore. And the thing I found is that if you make things visual, it's very hard to invent a problem. If you go from I have this library to I have this problem, and you start writing everything down. Because we always tell ourselves, like, I can do this in my head, but secretly we all know that we can't really do it in our heads. So you have to write the problem down and make it visual. So I did that for my pet project. So I have a front end, which was created in Fable and Fulma. I have a back end, which contains my data, which is a Postgres SQL. And I need something that gets that data and brings it to my front end. So what I need is a web API. But here's the thing, I have multiple options. So I need to find the web API that fits my pet project best. So that is the actual problem that we're trying to solve. And I also discovered, and this was like one of those aha moments in my life, that there are two things you can do with a problem. So first of all, you can solve it. And second of all, you can make the problem irrelevant. How do you make a problem irrelevant? Well, you think about the bigger picture, about the entire system, and you look at it and you think, like, what can I change within my entire system so that the problem becomes irrelevant? And like about 3 or 4 years ago, I wanted to learn to make better estimates because I was really horrible at them. And somebody pointed me in the direction of no estimates. And I started investigating, and I was really frustrated when I was reading it, because I kept thinking, like, this isn't solving my problem. Like, you're not telling me how to make better estimates. And when I discovered about making a problem irrelevant, I had my aha moment. I was like, no, they weren't teaching me how to make better estimates. They made it irrelevant that I didn't know how to do estimates. So if we look at the web API problem, like, how could you make it irrelevant? Well, you could use something like Azure Functions, and you wouldn't need a web API library anymore. But of course, I'm not going to do that right now, because I would have picked the worst title for my talk ever if I started talking about Azure Functions right now. So we're actually going to, solve it. There are many ways that you can categorize a problem. But I thought that this way was like most fitting for what I was trying to do. And it's categories on how much facts and judgments actually play a role in your problem. So first you have simplistic problems. There is one answer and it's a fact. Like, for example, what is F#? It's a programming language. That's a fact. So second, you have deterministic problems. There is one answer, but you have a bunch of data, and you kind of need to apply a process to it or a formula to get to that one answer. Like if we go back to the no estimates, your velocity calculations is a deterministic problem, how long it's going to take. Then third, you have a random problem. You have a lot of answers. They're all possible, and they're all identifiable, meaning that if you tried really hard, you could sum each and every solution for this problem. And this is what we're trying to do. So picking your technology stacks is a random problem. And last, you have indeterminate problems, which means that you have multiple answers. They're all good answers, but it's not possible to sum them all up. If you model your domain, there are a lot of models that are good. Some are better, some are worse, but they're all good models. And you cannot come up with all the models that exist for your problem. So that is an indeterminate problem. So the more unknown answers you have, the less fact will actually have an impact on your answer. And the more you will have to apply judgment to the problem to get to a solution. So we have a random problem, which means it will still be based on facts, but at some point in time we will have to apply judgment and make a decision. So if I try really hard, I can sum them all up. So I tried really hard. I also failed really hard in doing this. So what do we have? You have the classic Microsoft Web APIs that you can use. You have Suave and Freya. I already knew them. There was something called Giraffe, which was pretty new at that point. You have Saturn. There is something called Frank and Kayak. You have NDC, and you have Web Sharper. So we're looking at the bigger picture, and this is diverging on a problem. You're zooming out and you're looking at everything. Now, after you zoom out, you kind of have to zoom in again. That is converging on a problem. So how did I pick the final three? Well, Web API of Microsoft and NDC, I kind of already knew them, and I wanted to do something new. Frank and Kayak, there hadn't been any commitments to the libraries in like 3 or 4 years, and I didn't really know how relevant they still were. Web Sharper, I didn't have it in my list, but a friend told me about it. And same for Saturn. I was talking to Christophe about this, and he says, so you have Saturn on there? I was like, yeah, totally. Should fix this. So those two were too late to actually take into the comparison, but then I'm left with 3 options, which are really good answers. So Suave, Freya, and Giraffe. And I'm going to try to come up like which one is best for my problem. All right, now how can I get to categories or criteria? So every problem has factors, which means that those are things, circumstances, and conditions involving your problem. And out of the factors, issues arise, yes. Which are questions that you will need to be able to answer in order to make a decision. You have major and minor factors, which have major and minor issues. You only have like 2 or 3 big factors. So my pet project, making the web application. So we have listeners of the podcast that will actually become visitors, hopefully, to my website. So how many requests will I need to be able to handle? And like, how long does this website have to be up and running? Because if the podcast stops, it's kind of pointless to keep it going. So this is a pet project, and like I said, I have limited time to do this. So I was wondering, like, how easy is it to learn the libraries and to implement them? And how easy can I find help when I get stuck along the way? And I don't know everything right now. Like, I don't know where this project is going or what I'm going to do with it eventually. So how easy can I change or add something? And because questions are hard when you're comparing things, I try to label them in a way that made sense. So I came up with 10 categories, which is performance and longevity, the learnability, the simplicity, the readability of libraries. You have practical examples. You have specialization, like people who know this really well and that you can hire to do it. You have like how active is the community around these libraries, how easy can I test it, and how easy can I extend it. So I put them in the order I thought that was most important to least important to me. But I had been working on this for a very long time, and I had done a couple of things wrong already, so I wanted to check if I actually got this right. So I thought I'll just start with the first one in my list, performance, and I'll check it out. So you have a visitor, and it goes to the overview of my website. It can check out a detail, and it can go back to the overview. Like that was the basic implementation of what I was going to do right now. So how can I know how many requests there are? Well, Stack Overflow has all the answers to our problems. And I found this like one get or post is one request. If you have static assets, each file counts as a request. But because we're making a separate UI in Fable, I didn't need to count those files. And initial connections also count for a request. So that leaves me with 3 requests. So how many requests in total per second would I need to be able to handle? Well, I checked out like how many listeners does the podcast have, and every episode has somewhere between 1,000 or 1,200. Let's be very optimistic and say that like 80% of that comes to visit the website. That means I have like 800 visitors. And imagine that they can do all these 3 things, overview, detail, overview, in 1 second. Like, at best, I need to be able to handle 2,400 requests per second. And it's already, like, pretty much magic, because I don't think anyone can do that. So it's like performance, the most important thing for my pet project? Like, I don't really think so. So I thought, like, what else did I get wrong, and how can I make my sorting better? And I found this technique called pair ranking, which means that you compare each item on your list with the next item. So for example, like performance or readability. For my project, which one do I think is more important for me? Well, readability, because I just checked out performance and like that's nothing. Then performance or extensibility, which one do I find more important? Well, extensibility. And you go all the way down to the list until you get something like this. So this means that for every item, except for specialization, because I don't think I'm going to hire somebody to do my pet project for me, performance was not more important. And then you go to the second item, like readability, and you do the same. Until you get something like this. And then you can just sort of like count the number of votes that each category got, and you can do a sanity check, because I'm all checking these days. I'm all about looking if I got the right thing. And I have 10 categories, so multiplied by 9 divided by 2, you need 45 votes, and I have that. And so now, like, a natural order arises. Like, the thing with the most votes is the most important thing for you. So I compared my intuitive ranking with this technique. And, well, some of them I actually got pretty good. Like, that I would not hire anyone to do my pet project. I kind of predicted that really well. But others I got really wrong. Like, performance dropped almost completely down the list for this pet project. Of course, if you do this pair ranking, you might come up with something completely different, because it depends on the project that you're doing. And then we're going to sort of like make it really easy to see what's going on, and we're going to use a matrix to fill in all the questions that we have. So your criteria become columns, and your items that you want to rank become rows. And then, we're ready to go. We know which questions we need to answer. And I was really excited about it. I was like super excited about the talks that Freya gave. Marcus Grieb gave some lovely talks, and I was really excited about that. And then I was like, hold on a minute. Like, I clearly have already like my favorite picked out without knowing anything. So what I did was write everything that I knew about these libraries. I wrote it down. So for Suave, at that point in time, I didn't really know how to pronounce it. Like Suave, 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 I've heard many things and I was like utterly confused. This really nice person like a month ago pinged me and said like, I know you have this pronunciation problem, so here is how you do it, and apparently it's Suave. So I know that the logo is like a guy with a mustache in orange. It had really bad documentation. At that point it was part of the safe stack, and I had heard a lot about it, but I couldn't really remember if I had seen any code. I do know it was the first one, the functional approach to Web API. It was the first one that came out. It had been around for a long time. The people associated with this was Christoph Sislak and Stefan Forkman, although I knew that they didn't make this, and it was really slow. It was like, whoa, check out, you have bad documentation and you have really slow. These are clearly opinions about a library. And you also never saw code. So how can you know these things? Well, the last item on the list kind of explains it. 3 years ago, at the office, we had the discussion whether we should use, the Microsoft Web API or we should use Suave. And my colleague said that the documentation was really bad and it wasn't really fast. And over time, what my colleague said to me at that point in time became my personal opinion. I accepted that at face value, and I never checked again if it was still accurate. And we do this a lot. If it's a person that we really look up to or that we really appreciate, we take what they say at face value. And if it's a person that we kind of don't like, it's easier to reject their opinion and take the opposite stance. And that's okay, that's human, you do it all the time, but you need to be aware of it when you're trying to pick a technology stack. Because if it's a recommendation from somebody you don't like, you will throw it out of the window, not even sure if it's a good or a bad one. And then I did this for Freya as well, and I also noticed I had opinions about it as well. It's very difficult, but it's very light. How can I know this? I know absolutely nothing about this. And Giraffe was it's really fast and it's kind of a wrapper. And I also had never known Giraffe, so I needed to make sure that I checked out if these things were still correct and update my mental model about them. So now I was completely ready. I knew what I had to be careful for, and I was ready to compare. So I checked out the websites. Suave is a simple web developer F# library providing a lightweight web server. Freya is a modern, purely functional stack for web programming. And Giraffe is an F# micro-web framework, which you pipe into ASP.NET Core through middleware. It was what the hell am I comparing with one another? Is this even possible? Am I comparing apples with pears or oranges or whatever fruit you use in your language? So I started looking around, and I found this historical website of Katana in which they explain how they came to their current model. And they used the Owen layers to do this. So basically you have 5 layers, which is a host, a server, you have middleware, you have your framework, and then you have your own application on top of that. So I thought I'm going to check out where exactly my libraries are situated in these 5 layers. So for Suave, it has everything. You get a complete package and you don't need anything else anymore. For Freya and Giraffe, it's a little bit more complicated because you plug them in through middleware, and they're your framework and your application, but you don't get a server and a host. So it's damn, what am I going to do about this? Because I can't compare it like it. So I investigated, and both libraries work with Kestrel, and you can use IIS to integrate. So I thought, I'm going to put as much as I can the same way, and then I'm going to compare the totality of that with each other, and take Kestrel and IIS into account when I'm making this comparison. So, and now I am most definitely ready to start comparing this. And I was wondering, how can you efficiently learn this? And I came across this course of John Sommes, 10 easy steps to learn anything quickly. And I said, like, oh, this is what I need. I'm going to check it out. It's a paid course, by the way, but it's kind of worth it. So first you need to look at the bigger picture. But because we did the analysis of the problem, we already have a clear understanding of what the bigger picture is. Secondly, you need a definition of done. But because we made our comparison matrix, I already have that too. Like, if I can answer each and every one of these categories, I'm done. And this is not from the course, but this is my own advice. If you have limited time, like at the office, you cannot spend so much time on it, then spend more time on what you think is more important. Like, if readability is the most important thing, like, spend more time searching for that. And also, you can, like, take the top 4. And we rank them, so we're sure that we have the most important things on our list, and you just cut the list in half or something like that, and you just compare the top 4. All right, so I did that. So longevity and activity. So Suave has about 97 releases. It came out at the end of 2013. It has roughly 2,500 commits. And the last commit was like a week ago. And Freya has 3 releases, came out in 2014, has about 700 commits, and the last commit was about a year ago. I was like, this doesn't really look good. Or this could mean that they have a very stable product and they kind of don't need to update it anymore. So just because there isn't any activity in the GitHub repository doesn't mean that, like, they're not really doing anything about it anymore. And so, like, I need to find this out. Then Giraffe had 44 releases. It's a bit older than a year. It also has like 700 commits, and last commit was in February this year. Then specialization. I'm not going to hire anyone, but I want to give you the information. So at this point in time, I don't know if you can really hire someone for Suave. You used to be able to hire the people of the safe stack, but recently they sort of like moved to Saturn. So, and I know that Henrik, who invented Suave, has his own company, and you can't hire him. So at this point, I cannot give you any information on that. Then Freya is actually on GitHub under the Synchro company, which is Andrew Cherry's company, which is the guy who invented Freya. So you can hire him for sure. Then for Dustin, who created Giraffe, I found on LinkedIn that he's self-employed. I just don't know if that means you can hire him to do your applications. Like, he's not saying it explicitly on GitHub or anywhere. And then you also have the SafeStack companies that you can hire for Giraffe, because they do support that, because Saturn is built on top of Giraffe. All right, learnability. This isn't about learning it, it's about how easy could I learn it. So Suave has the most available. It's been around the longest, so that's quite logical. You have sample projects, you have 2 books, like booklets about Suave. You have the website, they're on Jitter. There are a lot of blog posts, which I will, make available. I have like a gigantic list of blog posts and talks and tutorial videos for all of them, so I'll put that available after, so you don't have to do the legwork. And like Freya and Giraffe don't have books, and Freya also doesn't really have tutorial videos, or at least I didn't find any. So if you want to start creating tutorials online, like there's an empty spot there. If you want to start writing books, there are 2 empty spots there. And Giraffe doesn't really have talks, or at least I didn't find any specifically on Giraffe. Like, it gets mentioned, but it doesn't really explain how it works. So if you want to become a public speaker, there's a spot there. And the fun thing about this is that you sort of get the practical examples for free because you investigated learnability. All right, performance. I had to look really hard for that, but in the end I came on a GitHub account from the Angry Bird, and that is Jimmy Bird, and he had done the performance test for like a lot of web servers. He also states in his repository that you need to take this with big grains of salt, some garlic, and some hot sauce. Whatever hot sauce may be. But let's look, like Suave has about 1,143 per second. Like it's still on .NET 4.6 because I didn't find .NET Core yet. And it's plain, which means that you just get back text. So then Freya, taking into account that we're going to use Kestrel for this, already has the numbers for .NET Core 1.0, which is about 10,500. And then Giraffe has about 87,000 per second able to handle. So that's really great. So then I wanted to check extensibility. I was like, how am I going to do that? Like I know, like I don't really need this at this point, but I still want to see if it's possible in case I will need it ever, in case my project is gigantically popular for some weird reason. So I thought, like, I'm going to go to NuGet.org and see how many extension packages are available for this. Like for what I want to do, this is more than enough. So Suave has about 37. You know, there's some stuff so that you can deploy to Azure. There are health checks. There's some stuff there for authentication. Freya has the most with 50. Like you have Hopak, Suave, Katana, and Kestrel support, which is like really great because that's a lot of flexibility you have there. And Giraffe has 11. So you have the remote for Fable. You can do it with TypeScript. There's a token router. Like Giraffe has the least, but that's kind of logical because it was built to use with ASP.NET Core. And of course, if you use that, you kind of get everything available for ASP.NET Core as well. So then simplicity, like how easy it is to get started with this. So I thought, like, for what I want to do, getting to Hello World in my browser is more than enough. So that's what I'm going to do. If you test it at the office, you might want to, like, prototype it differently. You might want to say, like, I want to create something really easy in which I can log in and have authentication. Like, that could work. But for me, getting to Hello World was more than enough. So for Suave, you just do like .NET new console, then you add it to Packet, and you sort of like start it, and whoop-de-doo, like there it is. It's very easy. Freya, you have templates available, so you sort of like, you know, init the template and add it to Packet, and you need to remove a couple of things from the FS profile, but it worked. Giraffe was a bit more difficult. You have a template, then you needed to add it to Packet, but the template was pretty big. And I needed to start removing a lot of code, and I needed to figure out which code I could keep and which code I could remove. But the fun thing about the F# community, and probably other communities too, but this is for F#, is that if you do a talk, well, first people watch it, apparently, and then like the creators of these libraries started pinging me. And that was awesome. And Dustin was like, yeah, you know, I saw that you had difficulty, that it took a very long time to set up. Like, there are easier ways to do this. And then, you know, the SafeStack team was like, hey, you know, we have templates, and you can pick your server, and you can, like, set it up really easily. And here is how you do that. So now I have, like, a lot of ways to set up Giraffe, which is awesome. I want to point out the second one, which you can use Packet, which is really great if you don't have any code yet. But I already had my front end and a couple of codes, and it overwrites the Packet files that you already have. So I couldn't use that for my project, but if you're like, if you have a blank slate, you can totally use it. Ah, yeah, and the -v none is to make the code that you have to remove just not there in the first place. So that's also great. So readability. Starting a web server is really easy. It's one line of code. Like, that's it. Start web server. with default configurations here. And then you can define your routes, which is a choose. And you have your get, and then you have your hello. And in case you want to greet people personally, you have a hello Gien. That is possible. And I saw this, and I was really enthusiastic about this, because this was beautiful. And I'll tell you why. Because if you look at it, you kind of see a scenario tree behind it. Depending on how you use, scenario tree is the very generic name for it in problem solving. And depending how you use it, it either becomes a decision tree, a utility tree, a probability tree. But again, with the matrix, it's a really easy thing to visualize, and you kind of see it happening there. So I made the dots. So you can really see what calls are possible. So if you write down all your scenarios as how you can hit your web server, you can really translate it very easily to your code and still see this. And I thought wow, this is really cool, because I have been used to different things at that point. So for Freya, because we work with Kestrel, it also has downsides, and setting up a server is a bit more elaborated, but you get the code for free. If you use the template, this part is done for you. And you just need to sort of adapt it to your own thing. And that's it. And then the code itself. So you need to declare a Freya router, which has resources. You need to create a Freya machine. I was my first impression is that the learning curve for Freya is a bit higher than the learning curve for Suave here. But you can reuse your machines. So again, you have that flexibility of Freya. But it's going to get a lot harder to understand what's going on. And then Giraffe, again, ASP.NET Core. So you have a lot of things, but you get them for free. If you use the templates, you sort of have to remove the things that you don't need. And then you have that scenario tree again. I started reading some blog posts about Dustin, and he said that he liked the way that Suave handled it so much that he wants to make this available for the ASP.NET Core libraries. So that is actually how Giraffe came into existence. And they work in the same way, except for here you have route and route F, and in Suave you have path and path scan. That's the only difference. So again, it's very easy to see which calls are possible. And then you have to start your server, but with using IIS integration, but you get this for free again as well. So testability. You have testing libraries for Suave, which have an entire test server built in, which is really fun, because then again, with not that much code, you can actually test it. And it's very readable. Freya is a bit more difficult because you have to create a test server. It has testing libraries, but at this point in time, I'm not entirely sure when or where I need to use them. So I didn't. And it's a bit difficult to read, but you still get the bigger picture. And then Giraffe. I'm really excited about this because Dustin writes such beautiful code. He has a lot of samples that you can check out. So what you see there, that's code that you can copy from his samples. It's not a library yet, but you can just add it in a file. And then you get for some really lovely tests that show you what it does. I was very happy about it and very excited. The dude really writes lovely code. So those are the 10 categories. So we now have some idea of what they all can do. We don't need to go to a deeper level because we need to make a decision about this and then actually go to a deeper level with the library that we want to use. So we're going to plug it back into the matrix. So first, I told you we're solving a random problem at the beginning of this talk and that you would have to make some judgment calls. Well, the moment is finally here. You're going to have to make a judgment call, because you're going to have to decide how much weight you want to add to each category. Like we have our order, but like in order to make a final decision, to have this come naturally, you add weights to your ranking, and you take them into account when you start calculating everything. So how should you read this? So activity, testability, longevity, practical examples are equally important. Like they're all 10%, they're equally important. They are 10 times as important as specialization for me. And readability is twice as important as the other 5 categories. And then you put them on top for easy. And then you do the pair ranking again. So within each category, you actually check which one you thought came out best. And then you sort of like transport them to the matrix. You multiply them with the weight that you gave. You count the total points that they get. And out of that, you get your final ranking. So what does this mean? Knowing what I know right now, in the context of my pet project, Suave is the best option for me. What I'm not saying at all is that Suave will always be the right option. And I'm not saying that Freya will never be the right option for a project. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Imagine that, so this was our initial weights that we put on it. Like imagine if I had decided differently, if I came up with a different order, and performance was extremely important, and testability and readability were like the top 5. And if I do the exercise again, I transport them, I add the weights, I count the total votes, and then you see that giraffe comes best. So then for whichever application you want to use, giraffe is it. So it really is applicable to the project and the context that you're in when you do this. And this is only from a technical point of view, like this analysis. You also need to consider the financial situation, like are there any licenses involved? How am I going to have to set up my infrastructure, and how much is this going to cost me? Do I have to pay for support, or do I not have to pay for support? Like, you can check out these things as well. And then there's the social aspect as well, like who made this? Like, is it an individual, a group of individuals, or a company? Like, is this company trustworthy? Do I like the culture of the company and how they handle everything? Like, these are also things that you can take into account to make your decision about what you will end up using. All right, so to summarize, a problem must be analyzed, so within the bigger picture and within the context. You have to do it structure, and you have to write it down. Like, I hear a lot of people say, like, you know, I do analysis in my head all the time, and it goes great. And that's not true. Like, our brains are fantastic things, and we're very easy into fooling ourselves that we can do all this in our head, same as it's easy to fool ourselves that we can naturally rank things in order of priority, but that's not really true. And I'm sure that everyone in this room has had this moment where they look at this code and they thought, like, what the hell were they thinking? Well, if you write it down and you keep it with you, you kind of know what they were thinking, because all you need to do is write the docs, and everybody knew that on the 10th of June 2016, like, this is what I was thinking. And that is why I made the decision. So you need to do it visually, and you need to use the right tools to do it. So you need to use problem-solving tools. We saw 3 very easy techniques right now. So you have the pair ranking, the weight ranking. To visualize the data, you have the matrix and the scenario tree. They're very, very easy things, and they're very, very powerful to do so. So a bit of a retrospective, like what I didn't find, or what I would have liked to have when I started all this, is the libraries kind of, not maybe this elaborate, but telling me, like, which problems did you try to solve when you were creating this? And more importantly, like, which problems weren't you trying to solve? Because if I know my problem, and I look at it, and it says like, oh, it's solving this, this, and this is what we're absolutely like didn't try to do. Like, you can just match it, and you can like say, oh yeah, this is absolutely not for me, and that not. I also would have liked to see more versions of the blog posts, about which version of the libraries they were actually talking, or at which point in time they were talking, because it's not always there, and it's a bit confusing. Which is also why at every slide you saw the date that I did this, so you can sort of like easily check, like if it's 2 years ago, then well, maybe I shouldn't use this anymore because it's been too long. And then like fantastic stuff happened when I first did this talk. Like I said, like everybody started pinging me, started updating the documents and asking me like, hey, what was missing? Can you add? Can you show us? So a lot of the documentation already improved at this point. The slides, like you can check it out on my GitHub, like the things were different the first time I did this, which was 2 months ago. Like the situation has already changed. Like software never stops moving. So every time you have to make a decision, even if it's like 2 or 3 months later, you might have an entirely different ecosystem because it never stops evolving. And you need to update the mental models that you have. And one of the other things that happened is that Alberto, a friend of mine, pinged. I talked about the talk that I was trying to do, and he was like, oh, this is really great. And like 1.5 months later, he sent me a DM message with like, hi, I would like to introduce you to Francesco, who started the frameworkless movement. And just like serverless doesn't mean that you don't have servers anymore, frameworkless doesn't mean that you can't use frameworks anymore. But what they're trying to do is sort of like the journey that I went through, like make people more conscious about the frameworks that they're actually buying into and what they can do and what's the upside and what's the downside and whether or not you can live with the downsides that this will bring to your project. And it's really cool, and you should check it out. It has a manifesto because all important movements have a manifesto. But it's really fun. So there's a lot on general problem solving, on decision making, how horrible we're at decision making, how we fool ourselves into thinking we're really good at making decisions. The books I used for this technique are the intuitive pumps and other tools of thinking. It's kind of a boring book, I'm not going to lie. But it's very interesting because he shows you how you can sort of like give your problem different perspectives, which is really great. Then the Thinker's Toolkit, which has a lot of techniques, including the ones I showed you here, like the matrix and the pair ranking. Then you have the Pocket Universal Method of Design, which are like summaries of everything that you can do with software, which is really cool. It has 150 design patterns as well, which I also have at home, and they're like a quick introduction into everything that is out there. And if you like something, you can sort of like check it up. To learn more efficiently, or how the brain actually handles learning, I read Make It Stick, which was very interesting. And then the Make It Irrelevant came from systems theory. And I read an introductions into system theory by Donella Meadows, and seeing how we're solving problems and creating systems, it's like what we do on a daily basis. Going into the general theory of systems is like really fascinating. It's also really dangerous. I will give you a warning about this, because you will see systems everywhere. Because hint, like everything is a system. Like that's the end conclusion of the book. I didn't spoil it at all. And there's a lot of other things about decision theory. I have a Goodreads account. I have more books like this on there, and feel free to add me anytime you like. It's the same as my Twitter handle. So this was the first slot of the functional track. We have a lot of more F# out there. So next we have Mark Seaman, which always gives great talks and you should check out. After that we have Don Syme, you know, the creator of F# himself, who will give a talk. We have lab hours for if you have questions. You can go to room 10 and, you know, the speakers and the people from the community will be there, including myself. So if you have questions about the mentorship program that I run and how it works and how you can participate, like, feel free to come over Thursday and Friday and ask me anything about it. We have seen Fable mentioned a lot of times, and I also mentioned that I use Fulma. Like, if you want to know more about F# from a front-end perspective, you should go check out Maxime Mongel on Friday. And I don't know if you saw the TensorFlow talk of Seth, but if you want to know the Microsoft alternative of deep learning libraries, you should go check out Matthias on the last slot on Friday evening. So that anything that's left to do is thank you all for being here so early in the morning. I hope you learned something. So if you have any questions, I'm not going to sort of like try to listen because I have a couple of hearing problems. And but you know, come up or find me somewhere in the other rooms and talk to me. So thank you very much.